Katie, I really do appreciate you showing up here. This is awesome. Little background. I don't know much about what we're going to talk about today,
Hmm.
and but that's okay because it's better sometimes if I don't know what the belief is.
Hmm.
It makes me more when I'm more naive to it. I can actually sometimes ask better questions and kind of work it through. And I think you've heard some of the podcasts or watched some of the shows or
I've
something.
listened to 4 of the
Oh my gosh.
podcasts, so
Okay. So you know how this works.
yeah, yeah.
There's no, there's not much magic here. I kind of go through the same routine. I try not to be boring about it, but really I try, it's more so when other people are watching what I'm doing in their own lives, they can talk about these kind of things, which sometimes are beliefs can be difficult to talk about, and we can talk about things in constructive ways and how people know what they know.
Hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I just wanted to say to you is I appreciate so much about the curiosity
Oh, nice.
of the
Thank you.
methodology that you use, and it's very similar to what I do. So I look forward to how that's going to come into what we'll talk about.
Lovely. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that. What is the belief you'd like to talk about?
The belief is that trauma is stored in the body.
Okay, that's interesting. Trauma is stored in the body.
Hmm.
By trauma, what do we mean?
That's a very important part of this conversation,
Okay.
because I think the word trauma is becoming, I'm going to say, hijacked lately. By trauma, what I'm talking about, and and I'm referring to it based on my use of a modality that's called somatic experiencing, and we'll get into that a little bit more as this conversation goes on. What we're generally talking about are events, circumstances that have impacted somebody and are to a degree where it's affecting their daily life
So experiences that have impacted somebody that's affecting them in their daily life.
in a non
Negative.
in
Yeah.
negatively or in ways that they are unwanted. I would say even more so than negative in an unwanted way. I mean, we can say the word negative, but I actually try to use less judgmental words.
Okay.
As I think it's more
That's good because to me, trauma has a negative connotation.
right, and I mean, trauma is not good, generally not great stuff, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything here. I think when we talk about, we just can get into very much the territory of good feelings, bad feelings, and the thing is that when we're talking about people's experiences, we often are talking about what kind of information they are getting from their body. And if we're labeling things as good and bad, we start getting into territory that can be more difficult to process sometimes. So,
Interesting. We might get to more of that later. That's really interesting. Okay, so but just to get a quick
yeah,
definition in the beginning, that we have trauma, which is a negative
yep,
experience that is that someone doesn't want, that impacts them
yep,
negatively,
yep.
and that it's stored in the body.
Hmm.
How? What does that mean? Stored in the body?
So what it basically means, in nuts and bolts, you can't think yourself out of it. You can't you can't say, I don't want to feel this way. I wish this wasn't happening, and I'm just gonna I'm gonna turn my attention to something else, and I'm gonna make it kind of just go away. I'm gonna distract myself, and that's going to help me. I just need to get over it.
Is it literally stored in the body?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Do you mean when you say the body? I mean, is it stored in my fingers? Is it stored in my brain? Where and how does that work? Like
So
where?
so here's another piece, which is mind body connection makes me, I'm gonna say, batshit. They're one and the same. They're not separate.
Gotcha.
So our brain and our body, it's one unit. It functions as one. Our autonomic nervous system is our brain connected through the spinal cord, through a system of nerves,
I
tissue,
see.
muscle. It's all one unit.
So if I'm saying it's stored in the brain versus stored in my finger, I'm saying the same thing,
You're basically saying the same thing.
right? How, maybe just trying to
Yeah,
understand
yeah,
like
yeah.
how. Maybe I would understand better if I knew like how what's the mechanism, like how is it actually stored? Like,
Sure.
I mean, when I think of stored, and maybe I'm not thinking about this right, I can think of like a hard drive that stores data and bits,
Yes.
and I'm thinking of That's how to think
this
about
is
it?
this is a great way to think about it.
Okay.
So one of a really helpful way to think about it is that all of us are born with the same hardware in our brain.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to speak in terms of persons who do not have some kind of organic damage. Okay, so let's just say there's been no medical damage, that everyone is born pretty much with the same configuration in their brain. Therefore, they would secrete the same hormones, chemicals, etc. Okay, so we have the same hardware, we have the same wiring. The software that we end up putting into it has to do with our environment. That involves people, experiences, and all that happens in our daily lives. Okay, so when we have an experience, the hardware is taking in these experiences, and that becomes the software.
If I'm saying that trauma is stored in the brain, am I saying anything different than what you're saying?
No, you're
Okay.
not. You're really not.
Then why don't I say that, though? I'm just really trying to understand.
So, because it's going to show up, it's not. We are not necessarily going to see it in clinical practice. I am much more clearly going to see certain aspects, or actually almost all of the aspects of the events showing up in the person's physiology through their body.
So the expression will be in the body,
That's
like maybe
correct.
the way they hold themselves, or the way we would know someone has had a traumatic experience is not necessarily, if it's stored in the brain, we're not going to see it. We're going to see the outward expressions of it, how their mannerisms and behavioral expressions of
That's
that.
correct. Or something that they don't even notice that they're doing, where I may notice. This is stuff that you need to have training for, to be able to notice that there could be a repetitive small twitch when they talk about something in a shoulder. That is an indication of a movement that's trying to come forth that didn't get to be expressed in a trauma.
I'm wondering why we talk about it in this language. I mean, when I think of, I haven't really heard this, but I haven't heard this in other circumstances either. Like, I don't hear that happiness is stored in the body. I don't hear that sadness is stored in the body. But it seems like we're specifically talking about trauma.
All of it is.
All of it is.
All of it is. Because all of our emotions are sensation based.
Okay.
All of them. And we know what we're feeling we know what we're experiencing because of what we are feeling. Not primarily because of what we're thinking. We don't typically think first. The brain experiences and decides what's happening for us based on what we call afferent information, which means bottom up. It means that the information comes from what we are physically feeling through sensation and experience. That comes through our physiology, meaning we could feel, say a grumbling happens in our stomach. While not an emotion, that sends information up to the brain signaling, oh, wait a minute, the thought, I am hungry. But the thought doesn't come first. The grumbling in the stomach comes first. That's an example of afferent information.
Okay.
Okay? And 80 to 92%, depending on which study you read, that's how the brain gets information about what is going on with us.
Okay. And when we're talking about storage, are we talking about storage in neurons?
We're talking about the emotional center of the brain. We're primarily talking about the amygdala.
Okay, but we're talking about brain structures that are storing
Yes.
information.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
On a scale from 1 to 7, how confident are you that this belief is true and
I
real?
know this is the number, and it's 7. And do you want to know why?
Well, before I ask you that, I'm going to ask you another question
Sure,
first.
sure.
On a scale from 1 to 7, how important is it for you to believe in true things that are true and real?
Absolutely a 7.
And I'm going to ask you a question that I don't usually ask until the end, but I'm going to ask this up front. It's a 7.
Mm-hmm.
Let's suppose you had no skin in the game. Would you have a preference of this, that this is how it works, or you have a preference that this is not how it works, or do you not care?
No, I mean, it's not about a preference. It's what the science has shown. And
Okay.
so aside from what I know from clinical practice and the 30,000 practitioners who are doing this internationally. We scientifically understand that this is how the brain functions and processes information. So we're understanding so much more about our bodies, and we know so little about the brain. I mean, what do we understand? Something like 3% of the brain overall as it is. So the skin that I have in the game is efficacy with my clients and what is helping them heal. So that's the skin I have in the game. If there was something else that came down the pike that was, here's the thing, okay. It doesn't, I can't see that would necessarily make this untrue. It may be something else that could be effective, but as of now, this is the science that we have and know.
Yeah, well, let me ask you that question more formally.
Okay.
If someone were to ask you, Katie, what's the primary way that we know that this belief is true, what would you say?
I would say we know this based on brain science.
And can you explain more? Like, what do we know? What
Sure.
are we knowing?
We know that based on the neurobiology of the brain, we know that the limbic system in the brain functions in such a way that when it has had an experience that relates to fight, flight, and I'm going to say immobility instead of freeze, and we can discuss that in a second, that then perhaps it gets what we can talk about as being hijacked, where it then becomes gets hypervigilant, creates the client to be hypervigilant over time, where it assesses danger where there isn't necessarily danger over time. In other situations, it's inappropriately assessing this. That we know what's happening in that part of the brain. We know what is happening. We have enough studies. We've done a zillion fMRIs, zillion, take that number.
So we can show how the trauma functionally, in an objective sense, changes how the brain
changes brain
functions.
function. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
If, and I'm not saying this is the case, if, and I'm not aware of the studies. I mean, I'm just because I haven't read them. I mean,
Sure.
I'm not saying they don't exist, but just because I don't. I mean, I'm somewhat aware of those, but I haven't read them. I mean, and so so if more studies came out and all of a sudden say, hey, we thought that this is how it works and how changes brain function in this way, but we really don't know that, or it's inconclusive, or we're not sure how it works, would you have less confidence in the belief at that point?
I may have, what I would have less confidence in would be how we're going to assess how trauma is being logged in the brain. I wouldn't necessarily have less confidence in how to work with it with clients, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm just trying to understand. So I think you're telling me the primary way you know this is the literature and the science, and if the science were to change for whatever reason, you would go on having the belief at the same confidence level?
So I'm feeling split as we're talking about this, because there's two things that I'm hearing and dealing with, even though you're not asking me two things.
Please.
And one of them is that when I'm working with a client, which is my primary interest, the science is what informed the practice and what the developer of somatic experiencing, Dr. Peter Levine, based all of his work on. And as things developed and we saw what was supporting the healing in people, when you're watching people heal, and things are, I'm going to say, sticking.
I think you're telling me is possibly, and I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Is that there's the science aspect of it, that how you know this belief is true, and I think you might be telling me there's a personal experience.
There's a massive personal experience
aspect
attached.
of how you're working with clients, patients, that show that this is true.
Yep.
Of the science versus the personal experience, what makes up the biggest portion of the confidence of how you know this is true?
The biggest portion probably probably is the personal experience. And because the personal experience is not just mine in session with clients, it's in what I know is happening through report also globally with the other practitioners and clients.
Okay. So let's take the personal experience part then, because that seems to be the primary way you know that it's true. And if it's, let's say, we're talking about from a 0 to 100, percentage-wise, what percentage would you say personal? It just helps me understand how
Sure.
you know. What percentage would you say is personal experience versus this percentage that you rely on science? Is it 30-10, 30-10, 30-70, 80-20? I mean, how is it? Yeah.
I feel like the best way for me to explain this is that I needed the science to convince me to have faith to begin the personal work.
You had to have science to give you faith to do the personal. So you needed science to give you faith.
To begin doing this work.
And by faith, what do we mean?
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh, I just put myself in a trap.
No,
You're not
I'm
trapping
really
me.
trying,
No, you're not trapping me.
I know you've heard this before, but I'm really trying to understand.
No. You're not doing that. It's
Yeah.
So here's the thing. So
Okay.
when I started doing this work, because I am a very science-based person.
Okay.
I want evidence. I want all of these
I hear
things.
you.
And somatic experiencing has not been accepted widely because it is difficult to do evidence-based clinical trials with this modality because people are not protocols.
So we're talking. Okay. So are we talking about something
I
different
know.
now?
So-
because we're talking. There's the idea that trauma is stored in the body, which is a belief. But
Right.
then you're talking about somatic experiencing, which sounds like something.
Which is the modality that taught me all of this.
The
So-
modality taught you. The
All of
modality
this
called
information.
somatic experiencing
Yep.
taught you that trauma is stored in the body.
That's correct.
Okay.
And it taught
So
me.
we should probably back up to somatic experiencing.
Yep, and it taught me all of this neuroscience.
Okay. All right. So back to the percentage. and
Yes.
We'll have to get into this. But back to the percentage of what, as far as personal experience versus the science.
So once I understood the science,
Yeah.
I was much more willing to take this leap.
Understood the science, but you're telling me that the science isn't there. That it's not. I'm just trying
No.
to. Oh, okay.
No. The science is the science, because it's about the neurobiology of the brain and how it functions.
Okay.
And how we function.
Okay.
All of us have these. We have fight, flight, and immobility / freeze. All of us have this.
Okay, so the science about that is there. But what the science is not there is about how the science informs the modality, the
Right.
psychology.
Here's a protocol,
the
and this is what you
practitioner-
do.
Okay, I see.
And here it is. Like
Okay.
that's what you do.
Okay.
That's not how
I
SE
see.
works. So it's like
I see.
that you can't do.
So you practice what you practice because of the personal experience.
That's right.
Interesting. The science comes first, but if
For
the,
me.
for you, but if the science were to change, would you still practice the somatic experiencing? Put it that way.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Because the basics of brain function, I don't really see that changing. We're all still going to have an amygdala, which we know is a memory center. We all have.
Well, I'm saying if the science were to change.
I mean, if our amygdala is suddenly, this would be a major evolutionary shift in our.
Well, yeah. I
Okay,
mean, I'm
okay.
sure. I mean,
Okay.
there's. I mean, I'm not up of it. We not. What we thought about the amygdala turns out not to be the case. We've done more
Okay.
fMRIs, and
Yeah.
that just seems like that's not how it works. And we thought that's how it worked, but who knew? But would you still go on believing that the somatic
No.
experience?
So here's the thing: it would
Okay.
probably shift somatic experiencing then. I mean, in the sense of we now have this different understanding, and it would probably be open to a different application of how the brain works. It still is going to involve the body.
What is the modality? Maybe that'll help me.
So the modality is it's a neurobiological approach to working with trauma.
Okay.
And the understanding is that trauma is held in our reaction to an event, not to the event itself. And so, when we have a reaction to something, that reaction is the thing that is basically, I call them imprints. It's like that's what's imprinted into our system, into our brain memory center. And if it was something that...
And we can't know that scientifically?
Sometime... what do you mean scientifically?
Well, you're telling me the science isn't there for this, and I'm trying to understand, like, what's not there.
So, I think that it can be... some people don't even know that they've had... some people don't even know that they have had an unhelpful response to something, and I'll give you an example. The most common one is people who've had car accidents or fender benders, even, where people walked away, quote unquote, unscathed, and for years they have kind of some physical maybe minor issues or agitation.
So how are you treating them?
So this is what happens is that there are ways of... one of the things that I ask clients to give me their history, and they inevitably rarely give me the list that I'm looking for, so I'll ask them about things, and I would say 95% of the time there's a car event of some kind, no matter how small, and they're like, oh, but it was nothing, and I'm like, okay, I just put it in the back of my head, and we'll talk about things. I'm not saying I'm looking for, let me be clear, I'm not looking for where the car event is. I'm just giving an example as we're talking about this. And I remember a very clear example. There was a client who had expressed agitation. I knew in the history that 3 years prior there had been a minor but significant enough that they did write it down on their history that they had been in a car accident. But they had reported feeling a lot of agitation recently, and as the person was talking to me, their right leg was tensing up. And I'm noticing they weren't noticing this, but I as a practitioner, I've learned I am looking for muscle tension. I'm looking for shifts in their breathing. I am looking for movements that seem a little bit out of place, that are not just shifting in their seat. And I noticed this muscle tension, and I invited the client to just be curious about what was happening in their right leg or what they noticed in terms of sensation. And these are things that people are like, well, this is weird. What the hell are we doing? But I think they're coming to me for specific reasons. They know that we're going to be doing this kind of work. And to make a very long story short, there was a movement that came forth, which was wanting to slam on the brake because they didn't have a chance to do that because the accident happened so fast. We worked through this movement very slowly and
work through the movement, like
yes.
So
stepping on,
actually,
literally
stepping on the brake.
We literally work through this.
Okay.
From the hip, and it took, I think, a session and a half. This is a very quick.
Yeah.
Things typically take much longer than this with the level of trauma that I work with clients.
So someone came to you and they're having some issues, and they didn't even present the fact that they had a car accident,
Nope.
And you're attributing it to the car accident.
And I'll tell you why. Because after that session, I still saw that person for about 3 sessions after that, but he came back and he said, I felt disoriented after that, which is common because we talk about it as the nervous system trying to reorganize and reorient, like you would after an accident. This is common. We see this so often. This is normal in the work that we do. And then after the second session, he said that his wife was feeling like she was starting to see him again in terms of who he was before. And I saw him again, and then he's like, I'm feeling good. And he...
Okay, I think I see where you're telling me this would be difficult to test scientifically.
Yeah, you can't.
Okay, let's say George is a therapist.
Okay.
And George has a client named Tommy.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to.
No, go ahead.
I'm just this.
Go for it. Do it.
This thing that pops in my head is kind of a bizarre outsider test here, but so we have George, and George has a client named Tony, and Tony has anxiety or depression. He comes in, and while they're in therapy, George notices that that Tommy's shoes are on too tight. He's like, I'm looking at it, his shoes are on too tight. I think it's causing him anxiety, because if your shoes are on too tight, it causes you anxiety. And over the course of therapy, George tells Tommy, I think what you should do is, make your laces looser. And Tommy makes his laces looser, and voila, over time we find that it helps him.
Okay.
That he's better, that he gets better, he's less anxiety.
Okay.
And George says, it's because I told you that your shoes were on too tight and I want you to make them looser.
Okay.
What would we say about George's thought about how that modality works?
So that's telling your client what to do, and it's not coming from the client, which is not actually what I do.
Well, I think he noticed that his shoes
noticed
were
that,
too tight.
But he's
And Tommy says, I feel better.
and that's great. And if that works, knock yourself out. I have no horse in that race.
How would we know if that's true or not?
It's up if the client is reporting that they're feeling better. I am not one to judge.
Okay. So we're relying on
Client report. But
The
I want to be
report.
clear
Yeah, go.
that what I am doing,
Yeah.
I'm not telling when I am noticing something with a client,
Yeah.
I'm not telling them what to do or how to feel. I'll say, so when I'm noticing tension, I don't say, so I'm noticing muscle tension in your leg.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying, I'm wondering what it would be like if you just checked in with your leg and were curious about what it feels like right now. So I'm not telling them there's tension, and they may say, I don't feel anything. And I'll be like, okay. So would it be okay to just kind of hang out with it and see what's going on there? I am never leading them. I've been doing this long enough. I know exactly how to do this, because if I lead them or tell them what their quotes, if I'm fishing for it, things will not resolve.
Well, I think you're telling me that the bias that was there is that you're looking for physical manifestations of anxiety or depression.
I'm noticing what's showing up that may have information about the body is going to tell us what it needs. The body is going to lead us to where the clues are, to where the information is about what needs attention and tending to. It will every time. I don't need to be really looking for it. It's just going to show up.
Well, in the case of the brake pedal, let's suppose that it wasn't that.
Let's say it wasn't that. Okay.
Is there a way we can know that? I'm trying to think of how.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So if he, so first of all, it still could be something that needed to physically resolve for him. I mean, let's say that was something that just still wow, that was something that still came forward, right? I mean, it still came out. I mean, I didn't tell his body, hey, feel into the brake pedal, feel what it's like. I don't do any of that.
Well, I'm thinking more of non-specific factors. He's sitting there. You're a very kind person, obviously. You're a caring person. You want to help him, and you give him unconditional positive regard, and you're giving him a sense of safety and support.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, how will we be able to differentiate that as the special sauce of why he's improving versus the idea that it's trauma stored in the body and we're using this modality to relieve the trauma.
So, one of the things that we know, which is a big part of what you're talking about, is that when in a traumatic event, every time we have a cascade of chemicals that are released in order to allow us the options of fight, flight, and immobility. Okay, in order to survive. Every time those chemicals flood our system so that we can survive. And what that means is that during those times, our body wants to do something. That it wants to do something that most of the time it doesn't get to do. For most people, there's people who end up having feeling like they are traumatized, for lack of a better word. And I'm going to say, even if they're highly impacted and really severely impacted by something, I wish I could have done this, or even not, I don't even know what I could have done. You can hear people say that a lot. I don't know what I could have done. Your body knows. And it will show up for us through these little, I call them behaviors, we all do in somatic experiencing, things that will show up in the body. You'll see people like start just small movements. Again, it's like you have to be paying attention to what's showing up as someone's talking about things. It could be a dart of the eye where they're looking somewhere to try and, like, maybe they wanted to run in that direction. And I'm paying attention for all of these signals. And so the desire to have these things complete, that is how we know that something has the potential to resolve.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is like, and I think I get that. And I guess what I'm saying is like George, the therapist, he doesn't believe that.
Okay.
For whatever reason, he just doesn't, he's free to choose to believe his therapy modality as you are.
Yep.
And he says, it's these non-specific factors, and you can talk about, looking at the body sensations and how about and how stuff is released and things like that. And I don't think so. I think it's just the kind therapist being there and working through that. Is there me, a third person, me as a therapist? How would I be able to find out like what's the modality that works here? What's the special? Go ahead.
And so related to what you just said, I apologize. That's where I got off track.
Yeah, please.
What we know that we need in order to work with that trauma, and for some of this to be able to resolve, is absolutely a safe enough environment and the right kind of support. Absolutely, those are necessary.
Right, but George thinks that's it. That's all you need.
Well, his client's going to end up in my office, and they always do.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a study. Because if we did I'm just trying to think this through.
Yeah.
If we did a study where, and help me think this through, because this is this is off the fly.
Yeah.
If we did a study where we had 100 patients who had these traumas, and half we just gave this, this very kind of generalized support psychotherapy, and half we gave
somatic experiencing.
Somatic experiencing therapy, and we found, hey, we looked at the two groups and there's no difference. What would you think about that if that, first of all, if that happened?
I would be really curious which practitioners you polled. They wouldn't have been very experienced.
So if we did this research study and it came out that there was no difference between groups, between this non-specific therapy and somatization experiencing therapy.
And I should say, this is the other thing. What I can say is that clients who, first of all, every therapy has its place. And I feel very strongly about that. This is not to poo-poo like other therapies, because also SE can be used in conjunction with other therapies. It does not have to be used
SE is in somatic experience.
So, yes, I know.
Different
We
SE.
have the same initials.
Gotcha.
We do. I know. It's very. I was like, I liked that, but I was also like, poor guy. It's going to be very confusing.
I was confused for a second.
I know.
Funny. Okay, go ahead.
But so it can be used in conjunction with other therapies. That's one of the things that's really fantastic about it. Is it does not have to be used in isolation. What often can be seen, and this is what I do see as a practitioner, and I know my colleagues have a lot of these experiences, is that clients who have gone and done other modalities, it's like a Band-Aid for a while. So they could be the same.
Yeah.
Yes, they're the same. Let's say they're the same efficacy.
Right.
Ours is what you're going to find. We're going to have staying power, and the other group is not. That's what you're going to find.
Okay. If we did a study and we did a longitudinal study, and the staying power between the two modalities were no different.
Yeah, not going to happen.
I understand. Humor me.
I will try.
Humor me.
All right.
Just humor me.
I will.
If the staying power between the two modalities were no different, I think what you're telling me is that you still wouldn't reduce your confidence level no.
No, I wouldn't, because the ways in which that I see. I can't speak to that other group. All that I know is what I see in my practice and what I see from colleagues and for doing this for the as long as I've been doing it. And
So the science, I get here. So the science really doesn't matter then, because as far as the modality is concerned, because if the science, I mean, the science for the modality, because if it changed, things showed differently, you'd still believe the belief that somatic experiencing is a therapy that helps traumatic storage of trauma.
it helps resolve traumatic events and it helps build new neural pathways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That this is a modality that helps that. And you still believe it at the same level. So if you had, let's say, in the personal experience, let's say you had the next 10 patients, 100 patients, humor me.
Okay.
And you're doing SE, different SE, and you realize you like it's not working. I'm doing this. I thought it was working. I'm doing this, and they're coming back, and they're saying that they're not getting better, or they're going off to these other modalities, and they're doing these other things. Would you reduce your confidence? And you still wouldn't.
No, and I'll tell you what. I mean, there are clients that I've seen, for whom this modality is not
I'm
the
getting
right
the
fit.
sense, and tell me if I'm wrong, that nothing would reduce your confidence that somatic experiencing therapy is a way to help the traumatic storage of, and it's hard for me to say this.
That's okay.
Yeah, the traumatic storage of experiences.
Yeah, the way that trauma lives in the body, and the answer is no. And it's not for everyone. There are people because it requires you to experience sensations. It requires you to feel your body. And there are people who do not and will not, are unwilling to do that. It is not an easy thing. We live in a society that tells us not to do that. So it's hard for a lot of people.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, and I've asked this before, so this
I'll focus.
shouldn't come as a shock, because
Okay.
you said you've seen a number of these. It seems like, regarding the modality at least, that nothing could change your mind. Do you think just in a general sense, do you think that it's worthwhile to have a belief, any belief at all, that can't be shown to be incorrect if it happened to be incorrect? I know we think that it's correct, but is it useful to have a belief that couldn't be shown to be incorrect if it happened to be incorrect? Because if a belief can't be shown to be incorrect, then how do we really know that it's true? Because it could never be shown to be incorrect.
It's so tough because this is like, but we know the Earth is round, and like, how is that going to change?
I
Right?
understand.
This is so
I
hard.
understand. It seems obvious, like the hand,
No.
like the fingers on your hand. I get it.
I mean, no,
But-
it's not helpful.
What's not helpful?
It's not helpful to have that kind of belief. No, it's not.
Okay.
And what I will tell you is that for me, doing the work that I do with the people who have experienced the kinds of and levels of trauma that I'm working with, I better be incredibly fucking confident in what I'm doing.
Does confidence make you better at what you're doing?
It's the confidence is based in the knowledge. My confidence is based in the knowledge, which is also based in the experience, which is also based in the science.
So let me put it this way: is that you believe that the Earth is round? I
do.
believe that the Earth is
I
round.
do.
I'm gonna,
I do.
I don't think I've disclosed that before, but I'm gonna go on a limb and say the Earth is
Good man, Mark.
round.
Good man.
And I am highly confident that the Earth is round. I am 6.999999 out of 7 that the Earth is round. I'm not going to say, for my own confidence level, it's just talking about me, I'm not going to say 7, only because if I happen to be incorrect, like we just got the science all wrong, you know? For whatever reasons, the flat earthers are right all along. If that's the case, I would like to think,
Yeah.
and I might be resistant to it. I might fight it. I'd like to think, and probably change everything I think about the world. But I'd like to think that if that were true, objectively true, I would be open enough to know it and to accept it.
Yep. I know that I have the capacity around those things. There are so many things in my life experience that in my growing up, in things that I wanted to believe about the world that have not been true. I mean, there's, that really have to do with human beings. And
Have you have any other beliefs that you were ever 7 out of, and at some point in your life realize it, I was wrong? I mean, I have had very confident beliefs that I personally experiencing, I mean, in my personal experience, that I've been very confident in beliefs that I have realized, for whatever reason, like, damn, wow, I was wrong about that. And I'm wondering, the reason why I ask that is, I'm wondering if that feeling of confidence, you can feel that level of confidence for that beliefs that are true, as well as for beliefs that are not true.
I know the answer to that is yes. I honestly, as I'm sitting here, I'm going, I can't recall them, but I'm literally having a whole
Right.
experience of going, I know that's true. Yeah, I know I've been wrong about things that I absolutely thought were
Yeah.
certain ways. Yes.
So I'm wondering, like, why is 7 out of 7 of this particular belief then?
because of working with hundreds of people and watching them get their lives back based on this way of working.
This might be a weird question, but I'm going to ask you this because of what you've told me so far. Do you believe in the soul?
I probably don't believe in the soul the way most people would define the soul.
Okay. I'm just asking for a reason. Let's say there is a Christian therapist.
Yeah.
The Christian therapist
Okay.
uses soul therapy.
Uh-huh.
Just talks about the soul, peers into the soul, and just deals with the soul. That's where trauma is stored. That's just how it is. You change the soul. And this therapist has seen hundreds, thousands of this Christian therapist has seen Christian clients, thousands of them, and they get better
Yeah.
by this modality.
Yep.
And this Christian therapist believes it out of 7 out of 7, 7 out of 7.
Yep.
And let's suppose, just for the purposes of this conversation, that person's wrong. That's not why they're getting better. And because, we're just not how this soul thing works, and we just somehow know it's not true. How could we show that person that it's not true, since we just happen to know that it's not true?
It depends on their willingness and their openness to, first of all, receive information. And I mean that very sincerely, because a lot of people are not willing to have a conversation.
If that Christian therapist said, what you're doing is not right, it's the soul, and if you just had the willingness and the openness to accept what is true here, you would be able to see that that person's modality of therapy is true. What would you say to that person?
I would say I'm unwilling to ignore the rest of that person's body that is determining what is happening here and is playing an absolute significant and important role.
Interesting. Yeah, I see that. What questions do you have for me?
I'm curious if there's anything that I've said that's been a little convoluted, or
I don't think so. I mean, the only thing that's convoluted sometimes for me is when I'm introduced to new terms.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get into the what is somatic experiencing, because
Yeah.
the purpose of the show is really more how
Yep.
do you believe what you believe, what's
Absolutely.
how do you go about knowing what you know.
Yeah.
And it was your belief is very interesting, because there's two sides of it. There's the traumatic storage part, which are basing on science, and then there's this personal experience, and you also mentioned faith, of the therapy modality, and those two beliefs seem to be intrinsically tied together. If I'm
Yeah.
don't mean to put words in your mouth, but
Yeah.
like we're talking about basically the same beliefs or same way.
They can't exist without the
Right.
other.
And that's why I was kind of putting them together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I find it fascinating when I do this podcast, YouTube channel, when I talk to people who are really super confident about their beliefs.
Everyone is, right?
It seems to be very human.
It seems to be very human.
Yeah.
Right?
I wonder why people are so, I mean, just generally speaking, have these beliefs that are so highly confident about.
I don't know if, some of it, I don't know, Mark, is like, for me, it's certainly come over time. I mean, it's definitely been because of how long and how, the longer I've done this, and I'm very skilled at it, and I do not mean that in an egotistical sense. I really don't.
Yeah, and this is, and I hope we're not saying that
No.
your therapy is not working,
No,
and your patients aren't
no,
getting better, right?
no,
Yeah,
no, not at all, not at all.
Yeah.
But the absolute humility that I feel when I am watching something unfold from somebody is, it's like, I remember, my mother died 3 years ago, but before she did, it's like her husband has always had these back issues, and he's an engineer. He's all like head, there's like nothing here. And I was like, Charlie, just let me work on your back, because I also do somatic touch work. And he was like, oh, okay. He's like, but he's a wonderful, warm guy. And so he let me do some touch work on him, which is just like, it's not manipulating or anything. And like, his back got better in like 3 weeks. And, and it's not witchy, but it's like, it's so hard to explain this stuff, because it's like, it sounds so woo woo, and it's like, all this like stuff. And the thing is that it's just based on how we're wired. It isn't woo woo. It is based on our neurobiology. It's based on everything up here.
Yeah.
And so it can be very frustrating in a world that demands evidence-based and shits all over SE all the time. Even there was an article in the New York Times, probably 2 months
And
ago.
I'm not aware that who's shitting over SE.
Oh, the psychological community just generally does. It's like, it's not evidence-based, so it can go fuck itself. I mean, and the thing is like, especially in terms of working with trauma, it's just, again, a person's not a protocol. And it's like, EMDR is great for single event trauma.
And that's the I.
And I'm trained in that too. And it's like, everything has its place, but it's
Yeah.
like, when you're dealing with stuff that's much more entrenched in the body, it's like, it's a different experience. And I understand it so much more deeply now in a way that is just like, and it's not like, oh, you have to be delicate. It's like, no, sometimes you got to fucking get in there and dig it the fuck out. Like, you got to,
Gotcha.
So anyway, I'm babbling.
No. Last question, or last series of questions, or last thought here. I know you have this very confident belief about this. If you were wrong,
Yeah.
happen to be wrong,
Yeah.
I know we're thinking that you're not, but if you happen to be wrong, would you want to know it?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Tell me. And I'd want to know then what are the mechanisms that we've been working with that have been working? Like, what has been happening that's been, like, then what has been happening? Because something's working. And yes, tell me. I want to know that. I mean, this is not about ego. This is not about a need to be right. For me, and I think I would dare say, I'm going to walk out on a really big limb here and say this for so many of the other practitioners I know. This is not about us. This is about helping heal people, the world, systems. I mean, people are doing this in 42 countries. So
It seems like you're very invested in helping others.
yes,
And that you're doing this therapy because when you're doing it, you're getting this feedback that you're helping people and that you're really doing some good here.
yeah,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get that. I totally get that.
yeah,
Yeah, right. When I'm doing this podcast, I get that too. I sometimes I get the feedback sometimes that I'm helping, and that makes me feel good, and and it makes me do more of the podcast.
yeah,
And and I think I try to be honest with myself, like when I'm doing the podcast, that if I was doing more harm than good overall, I would feel terrible about it,
oh,
and I would stop doing it. And I'm trying to think, how could I know that? How could I know if this kind of conversations that I'm doing, how would I know that if it's helping or hurting? And right now we're doing SCI
Yeah.
Street Epistemology International
yeah.
is we're coming out with a book, a manual, and we're actually going to run some research studies
Awesome.
on it and
That's
see
great.
if it does anything. And I'm really excited about it, but also I have so much skin in the game now
Yeah.
that if this doesn't, this research we're going to research on, if it doesn't come out as a thing, I'm going to feel bad about it. Like, gosh, I thought I was really helping people this whole time. It turns out maybe I'm not, or maybe, and I'd hate to feel that I was making things worse. But I think what I'm saying is that I really want to know, if it's helping. And I feel that it's helping, and I
Yeah.
know it seems, and I get that feedback.
Yeah.
But sometimes if I'm in my, when I'm at sleep at night or falling asleep at night, I'm thinking like, is it? And I really want to know, and how could I really objectively find out? And that's kind of where I am about that. What do you think about that?
Hearing what you just shared is just that's wonderful, Mark, and I mean that in all of the ways. When we think about what we're doing, helping, hurting, I'm going to add little to no impact. It can be really difficult to know sometimes, and I know
Yeah.
that for me, things really go up and down with the work depending on what's happening with my clients, and it's not easy. I mean, the work that I do and that my colleagues do, it is not easy. It's not easy swimming in these
Yeah, especially when it
waters.
sounds like it's not an accepted therapy, and you're sort of on the cusp of what's accepted in psychotherapy these days. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really care about that.
Right.
I'm not the kind of person who gives a rat's
Because
ass
it's
about
personal
that.
experience.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I also, it works. People are getting better. That's all I care about. That's
Yeah.
all I care about. But that piece of, if I thought for 1 second, and that I was overall doing any kind of harm.
I guess what
Oh.
I'm saying is, I think it's, for me, I'm doing it mostly because of personal experience, because other people's personal experience as you, and because I don't have the science. But I think if the science came out and to my expectations of how a scientific study should be run
Yep.
and things like that,
Yep.
and the science came out that, let's say it came out the opposite, that this is hurting, I would try, I think, this is just from my belief in street epistemology, the other SE, I think I would stop doing this. I think I'd stop. Because to me, when I'm doing personal experience, and I'm relying on personal experience, I'm concerned about my biases coming in. Like, I want this to work, or I get good feelings that I feel that it works, or it feels good, or I get the feedback from the people who tell me it works. I'm not getting feedback from people. Maybe people don't tell me it does, or it's
Yeah.
not working, or does not help. And I'd like to think that I would try to do something else.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I couldn't necessarily stop. I couldn't do a full stop because I couldn't abandon my clients like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I would not take a really hard look
Yeah.
at what came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thought of that would be horrifying, and I mean that in the sense of
Yeah.
would
I feel
I
that too.
would I it would
Yeah.
be horrifying.
I feel that too.
Would I mean the thought that there would be some harm being done because it's the antithesis of what every ounce of
Exactly.
intention.
I would feel terrible of what I'm like what I'm doing if it hurt people, because it's not what I'm about,
Oh,
and
my
it's
go-
not
oh.
what you're about.
Oh.
And we're both starting with some basic assumptions. Like we knew, I'm starting with basic assumptions about how people form beliefs and metacognition, and you're starting off some basic assumptions about neurophysiology
Yeah.
and how we think the brain works.
Yeah.
We all have these basic assumptions that are I have some basic assumptions that I believe are rooted in science,
Yep.
and so do you.
Yep.
And I think I'm just using this as a parallel here because we have some similar things here. Because I'm not any different. I have such that are some principles that are rooted in science, but I am practicing something that is based on self-experience and other people's self-experience. And I think you're saying the same thing. And where we're differing a little is that if the science comes out that this is the opposite, I would quit tomorrow. I would feel terrible. I would try to make it right in the world somehow, but I would quit. And I think you're telling me you would go on doing it. And that's a difference between us.
Well, what I'm saying is I ethically can't do a full stop. I mean, my licenses don't allow me to do that.
Well, you do a different kind of therapy.
I would do it. Well, I would. Yeah, I would. That's correct. That's correct. And yeah, I mean, a part of it would stop. Yeah, I wouldn't stop as a therapist in that moment. But it,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
Could,
And I wouldn't stop talking to people and having
But I'll tell you.
conversations.
But I will
either.
tell
Yeah.
you, it may cause me to quit therapy altogether. It possibly could.
And this could make me stop doing podcasts and YouTube altogether. Sure.
Yeah.
I could definitely see that.
I could
Yeah.
see that happening.
I could see that too. On the very beginning, I asked you on a scale from 1 to 7 how confident that this belief is true. I think we broadened the belief a little bit with with the trauma mass being stored in the body, and expanded a little bit to SE, different SE. How confident are you that this belief is true?
7.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm open to being shown otherwise.